I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first.
Richard Nixon is so many things to so many people. The man who went to China, ended the Vietnam War, and at the same time looked America in the eye and told them he was not a crook. The video of his boarding the presidential helicopter one last time from the White House lawn and waving his arms in farewell was not the last anyone heard of our 37th president. And as we learn more about him and his impact on America, we should understand more about the man at his very core. Let's welcome into MidPoint veteran political consultant, lobbyist, and political strategist, also author of the new book, Nixon's Secrets: The Rise, Fall, and Untold Truth About the President, Watergate, and the Pardon. It's a pleasure to welcome Roger Stone into the show. Roger, thanks so much for being here.
Ed, thanks for having me.
Roger, honestly, when you look at a book like this and you hear the untold truth about Nixon, some people will go, I thought we knew everything there was to know possibly about Richard Nixon at this point, but your book brings up so many things that are still hidden. I'm curious as to those 2 or 3 things that right off the top, people would really sit back and go, I never would have guessed.
Well, Richard Nixon, of course, really resurrected his career not once, not twice, but 3 times. He really came back from the political dead. By 1963, he was completely and totally finished, washed up, has-been. And because he shrewdly campaigned for Goldwater, and because of the assassination of John Kennedy in the Vietnam War, and I would argue the assassination of Robert Kennedy, a path was cleared to him, for him, to become president. But my book includes both small things and big. For example, people don't realize Nixon couldn't read music, but he could play the clarinet, the saxophone, better than Bill Clinton, the accordion, and the piano. He loved classical music. He worked out religiously, exercised 1.5 hours a day. He ate clean. He did not eat beef. He did not eat pork. He was very conscious of his diet and his physical fitness. He had an enormous retentive memory in terms of he knew the names of all my children. He knew the names of my grandchildren. He knew the names of my dogs. They were all in his political file. He would call me on my birthday every day from the time he left the White House until the year he passed away. He was a great politician on a certain level. But my book is really a trajectory of his entire career. The rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall, and final comeback of Richard Nixon.
Isn't it fair to say that if you have those rise, fall moments, as you said, he played an instrument without reading music, that he was an expert at playing people more than anyone else? Because if you're going to rise, fall, and come back again, you still got to know your opponents and you still have to know how to play people.
Yeah, no, he was a brilliant politician, but he was still an introvert in an extrovert's business. He was a very uncomfortable guy in his own skin in a certain sense. He wasn't the natural performer that, say, Ronald Reagan was. But if you look at him in that famous film of 1960 on election night, when it's clear that he is going to lose by a squeaker, and he says, if the present trend continues, Senator Kennedy will be elected. This is a heart-crushing moment, just a crushing moment, but he's able to smile and soldier on as his wife is on the verge of tears. This is a man with tight control of his own emotions.
What about the death of John Kennedy? Because I know you touch on that as well and what that meant to Nixon's career.
Well, I think the death of Kennedy opened the door for Nixon's comeback. It really had the unintended consequence of breathing life back into Nixon's political fortunes. First of all, he assessed that Lyndon Johnson would be substantially weaker than John Kennedy. He also ultimately determined the '64 nomination against Johnson was a fool's errand, that he was best off to let Goldwater have the nomination. Yet when Rockefeller and Romney and Scranton and all the liberal Republicans bailed out on Barry, Nixon did more campaign events for Barry Goldwater than Barry Goldwater did for himself, tying up the conservative wing, the Goldwater wing of the party, and laying the groundwork for the greatest comeback in American political history. I would point out 2 things to you. Nixon went from being first elected to Congress in 1946 to being vice president in just 6 years. He went from saying in 1962, gentlemen, I am finished. This is my last press conference. You won't have Nixon to kick around again, to becoming president of the United States in just 6 years. Extraordinary.
Watergate still speaks to so many of us of an era, and it's funny how, of course, as people get older, the younger people still don't quite understand. You ask a 20-something and they'll have no idea what Watergate is, but it was fascinating for so many things that it brought into the political arena, the media, so many other things as well. But what caught me in the book was there's always the discussion of the Nixon era, the Nixon cabinet, Nixon being involved in the bugging of the Democratic National Committee. You bring out in the book how the Kennedys bugged the Republican National Committee, and they didn't get caught.
Yeah, no, the sanitized version of the 1960 election, as laid out by Theodore White in his book, The Making of the President in 1960, is a very romantic and thrilling story. It's just not the truth. The truth is the Kennedys broke into Nixon's doctor's office to steal his medical records. They broke into his accountant's office in L.A. to steal his financial records. They bugged the Republican National Committee, or I should say eavesdropped, with these big ear listening devices from across the street. And they also wiretapped his hotel suite at the Sheraton Ward Park on the eve of the second Nixon-Kennedy debate. The Kennedys played rougher than Nixon. So I would argue, Ed, that the defeat of 1960, where I believe the election was actually stolen from Richard Nixon by the mob in Chicago, by the Daily Machine in Chicago, and by Lyndon Johnson, and the tough tactics used on Nixon bred the so-called paranoia that led us into Watergate.
Well, I think, and I even mentioned this last week when we talked about Nixon a little bit here, the fact that he was a tough politician. Not everybody liked him. He was a difficult man sometimes, but he was a product of his era. You just talked about the Kennedys. This was no quick little dishwater era for politics here. These guys were down, they were dirty, they were nasty, they did things behind the scenes. They did whatever they could, certainly a lot more than they do today, because back then you could get away with it.
Well, one of the things I say in my book, to many people's surprise, and I'm sure there's some Nixonites unhappy about this, but Richard Nixon's early career was partially funded by organized crime and the mob. So was Kennedy's, so was Johnson's, so was Adlai Stevenson's, so was Stuart Symington's, so was Harry Truman's. This is the way it done. We didn't have campaign finance laws. There was no reporting. And organized crime and the Democratic Party overlapped in many places like Chicago, and the mob was a player in American politics. So I try to put Nixon and his times in some perspective.
You are very critical of the CIA in this book, and you are very critical a couple of times, talking about they sabotaged the Watergate break-in and how Nixon was taken down by the CIA. Tell us about those briefly. We got about 2 minutes left.
Sure. Look, the mainstream media story of Watergate is a grotesque and fantastic distortion of historical truth. The truth is, from the beginning, the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, and the Pentagon were opposed to détente, opposed to withdrawal from Vietnam, opposed to the China Initiative, opposed to the SALT agreements with the Soviets. They were spying on Nixon early in his term. They actually plotted his assassination twice in Miami. That's in the book. And ultimately, they infiltrated and sabotaged the Watergate break-in in order to get caught, which of course ultimately brought Richard Nixon down, hopefully in their view, to end his détente policies.
Of course, there are always comparisons to current presidents. You recently wrote an article where the headline was Nixon versus Obama. Yes, Nixon was bad, but Obama is worse. Would you care to elucidate a little more on that?
Sure. Look, all these liberals run around talking about Nixon's extra-constitutional, extra-legal activities. What about this president? First of all, Richard Nixon saved the state of Israel in the Yom Kippur War. This president appears to be turning his back on Israel. Richard Nixon's article of impeachment, including bombing Cambodia without congressional intent. I don't remember Congress approving the current bombing in Iraq. That didn't happen. Nixon lost 18.5 minutes of tape. The Obama administration is missing hundreds of thousands of records regarding Obamacare and getting away with it. The Nixon administration talked about using the IRS to harass their political enemies. Obama has done so and is missing the records to prove it. Imagine if the head of the IRS under Nixon called their political opponents a-holes and crazies. The liberals would be up in arms. So by any measure whatsoever, Obama is a less successful president than Nixon, and he certainly acts more illegally than Nixon ever dreamed of.
The book again is Nixon's Secrets, The Rise, Fall, and Untold Truth about the President, Watergate, and the Pardon. It is out today. I think it probably should be something that everybody in a history class should read, because it certainly is going to be a whole lot more in depth than a lot of things that you will hear in a lot of history books. Roger Stone, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with the book, and trust me, you're going to teach a lot of people a lot of things about Richard Nixon.
You can go out to Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. The book is available today. Thanks for having me.
There you go. Thank you so much, Roger. All right, later on this hour, right here on MidPoint, how the media is covering the accidental death of a racer in upstate New York, filled with facts and more than a little hype. The focus of today's edition of News Call. And after the break, John McCain and Peter King with warnings about ISIS, a group that now we may need to fear on an international scale. It's coming up right here on MidPoint.